And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bub and the Bloom, episode 30, our second episode of the week, talking baseball HQ forecaster. Really looking forward to another one. The first one was pretty darn awesome with Corbin and Jock. We got three HQers on today to talk about their written work, their essay work in the forecast. We're going to space it out. They each get about 20 to 25 minutes or so, give or take, where the conversation goes. And we're going to talk about their articles and much, much more. But before we get there, I'm on Twitter at BDentric, and my co-host is always on Twitter at RyanBHQ. Ryan, how we doing, my friend?
We're hanging in there. It's been a day in real life. The local schools are closed, so daycare is closed, and we're making do here. And of course, podcast is high priority up there with kids. So so we're able to do the show, and I'm excited, man. Last show was awesome. Corbin and Jock were excellent. The bar has been set high. I think we'll clear it. We'll clear it today. So I like these two shows in 1 week. We got a nice flow going.
I love this show. Before I'll introduce our first guest in like 2 seconds here, I love this one especially because most people look at any draft guide in theory, let alone the forecaster, to look at players, player analysis. That's what they look for. So the boxes. But what's cool about the forecaster, we kind of talked about in the last one, Ryan, about the encyclopedia at the front and whatnot. And there's these essays from very, very qualified writers, some with HQ, some contributing outside. So this podcast will be about three of the writers who wrote essays. And one of the writers, of course, who we're going to introduce right now, did some player pages and boxes as well, which is cool. But he wrote a really, really good essay we're going to talk about called The Benefits of Structured Drafting in Rotisserie Leagues. You can find him on Twitter at _Dan Marcus. Daniel Marcus, how we doing, my man?
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk baseball.
Yeah, this is going to be a blast. It's fun to see, like I said, the written content in there. It's like an extra plus to a lot of. I feel bad saying draft guide. It's not a draft guide, but people know what I'm trying to say when it's your preseason draft prep book. So it's fun to see that written content. So before we dive into this, I know you do some other written content as well. How'd the last season go for you, writing wise? What did you like gain out of it, and what fun took place in 2022 for you?
Yeah, writing wise, it was busy. I do some work at RotoWire as well. So between the two, Baseball HQ and RotoWire, I was busy. Did a lot of work at Baseball HQ specifically. I do 2 playing time tomorrow, 2 divisions of that. NL Central, I'm a Pirates fan, unfortunately, so that one's easy to follow for me. And then I've gotten to know the NL West equally well over the past couple of years, so that's been good. And then I also got the opportunity to start jumping into some facts and flukes columns as well. So nice. Busy times. Yep, it was a good time though.
That's like the old Bloomfield path. I had I think up until like 5 years ago, I had the NL West playing time tomorrow, and then I moved to facts and flukes. I never did 2 divisions at once plus facts. That's a lot, man.
Yeah, I wasn't on full time. I was rotating. I think someone might have fallen out of the rotation or something like that. So I was only doing those once a month. Nice. But yeah, the 2 playing time columns was enough to keep me busy. So
that's where you're supposed to go, Bloomfield. I'm coming for your job. Speculating.
Yeah, I got a long way to go for that.
But good stuff. It's always great work over there. So it's fun to hear that you're grinding on like we all do. But the fun thing over here to talk about is your essay, The Benefits of Structured Drafting in Roto Leagues. And we don't have to give everything away. Obviously, we'll talk about pretty much all of it, but people do need to go get the forecaster. We talk about it all the time. But kind of like, what's the idea behind this essay? What did you learn, I guess, through this essay?
Yeah, it's kind of what I learned and what I hope to do with it next. It's kind of a 2-part answer. So
perfect.
30-word in fantasy baseball circles, but I actually got the idea from fantasy football. So, talking about structured drafting, it's, a huge topic in fantasy football. I didn't think of it, necessarily being as big in fantasy baseball, but, with different kind of strategies popping up that have been a lot of preseason discussion, pocket aces, closers early, speed only guys early, those types of strategies. It kind of gave me the idea of, like we talk about zero RB and fantasy football, stuff like that. Does anything like that translate to fantasy baseball? So just kind of got that idea. And then, tried to think of some of the strategies that people, debate in fantasy baseball, and tried to see, what I could come up with in terms of, if there is a discernible advantage and where that might come from.
Yeah, when looking at your essay, I really enjoy just even right out the gate here because you mentioned the different strategies and people talk about it a lot. Take pitchers early, take hitters early, certain hitters, certain pitchers, like you're talking about, different structures, and you even break down over like the last 4 years and 12 and 15 teams, just the percentages on what took place before you even dig into kind of what worked and what didn't. Because there's been a lot of really good work done showing that hey, you need an ace or two. That's just kind of like what it's going to be. But it's not always the end all be all because before Phil Dussault did his Magic Clear 2 years ago, pocket aces never won an overall competition. So it's like it might do really well to win a league, but can't do the whole thing. And so you have all these different things breaking down. When you did some of your research on this, what did you find to maybe be, I guess, the best way, or maybe there's a couple that are pretty good ways to maybe start out your draft that seem pretty successful?
Yeah. So first, I just want to, it's in the article, but I do want to just start with a disclaimer kind of first of all, which is kind of what the data that I have can and cannot tell us. Because I don't want people to either hear this or read it and think one thing when that's not really kind of what we have yet. So it's not like a win rate type data yet because I only used league winners from RotoWire Online Championship Leagues and main event league champions. Obviously, to get a win rate, you need to get all the teams from all those leagues.
We would need several Dan Marcuses to be able to manually do all that.
Yeah. In an ideal world, I would love to find a way to do that. I think that would be, awesome. But yeah, it takes a good amount of time just to do the league winners to map all that out. So, that's a long-term, it's still a long-term goal. I don't know if I'll ever reach it, but it is kind of something I want to do. So I just want to be clear. It's not like a win rate type thing. But someone, when it got published originally on Baseball HQ before drafts, 2022 drafts. And someone in the comments, people had a lot of interesting comments, and I actually mean that in a positive way. I'm not being sarcastic. I actually do mean that.
Because usually the comment zone is pretty. So yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, I actually
not at HQ. We got good people.
Well, that's because they're subscribers. There's a difference.
Yeah, it's not the yeah.
Yeah, I do mean that positively. And someone asked, like, basically, do you think this is just like showing the trends of how people draft? Which, to an extent, I think it does. But I do think it gives more than that. So, I mean, for example, I didn't have the chance to do it before, but I was thinking about, like for closers, for example, if a certain percent of league winners have at least one closer, well, how many closers are going inside the top 5 rounds? And then you can kind of do that math. So how many teams could possibly have one closer based on the ADP? And then if the number of league winning teams has drafted a closer is higher than that percentage, then you can discern that there's at least some advantage in doing that. So that's like one example that I was thinking about. So, I mean, yeah, I think I'm trying to pull up the exact numbers again here. But closers, I think, are a major thing that has been on the rise. You can see, particularly in 15 teams, that number is rising. Where there's at least one closer being taken. And I mean, I know that was I think it was Ron who led off with that in the last year's forecaster, if I have that correct, talking about how saves have been distributed. So, I mean, I think that lines up with a lot of the information that we kind of have in the community as a whole. So that's one example.
Yeah, it's wild. Just real quick, just to like, and I want to make sure to what you were saying too, Dan, about like, this isn't win rate. This is the percentage of winning teams that had this roster build. So like, because I've got the numbers in front of me with the closers, the number of 15. So in the main event, the number of league winning teams that drafted a reliever in the first 5 rounds was 21% in 2018, 13% in 2019. And this really stuck out to me. And I'm glad we did the 2022 update at the end of this. In 2021, that number jumped to 40%. And then last year it was 51%. So if I'm understanding it right, 51%, basically half the league winners in the main event last year drafted a closer in the first 5 rounds. Is that the right way to take that data?
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
And then basically what I was trying to say, I don't know if I articulated it very well, but basically what I was trying to say is then if you go back and look at the ADP, basically if there were less than, I mean, that's kind of a tough number with 15 teams, but basically if there were less than 7 closers taken in what would be the top, 75, then you could say that there was some type of advantage in doing that, that you're gaining, some type of advantage. So then that could be a way that you could kind of take the base research that I've done and then try to kind of take your strategy to that next level. So yeah, I think some of it is trends, which is why the win rate, taking that next step in the data would be useful to get even more information. But I do think you can go back and kind of cross check in that kind of way to kind of figure out where the true advantages are.
It's pretty wild to me looking at some of these numbers here for each kind of option. I guess there's closers, starting pitchers, but one that really stood out to me is stolen bases, because everyone puts such a premium on like, hey, we got to get like X amount of stolen bases early. We got to do this, that, and the other. Yeah. But when you look at these numbers for just overall league winners, in theory, the number keeps dropping each year from league winners, and that I guarantee if you didn't show this graph to anybody and you just put like a poll out on Twitter, everyone would be like, no, there's no way. There's no, like, you guys know, because everyone emphasizes it so much. So then, like, last year, Vlad Guerrero, nope, can't draft in the first round. Not viable, not possible, so on and so forth. So that makes it really interesting seeing those numbers in person there. And just the numbers, you don't get all the details behind it. Just the numbers shows a lot. Was there anything else that stood out to you kind of like that? Because that stood out to me real quickly. Because like pocket aces make sense because you need 2 guys to stay healthy the entire go. That makes a lot of sense. But still, one starting pitcher in ace did very well. So on and so forth. But still, to me, to see the constant decrease in the stolen bases kind of stood out to me a little more, that maybe we are emphasizing catchers and pitchers early on so that you can go get your steals later. Maybe that's the theory behind it, or that it's just not as viable because the stolen base, I guess, world landscape has changed so much.
Yeah. I think one thing that is interesting is I think catcher is an interesting case. I've always been very resistant to drafting a catcher early. I think this data did kind of open my eyes, certainly to the benefit. I still think there's a lot of drawbacks to it, potentially. But the idea, like if you hit on a JT Realmuto from this year or something, that gives you a massive advantage. And I think the numbers do kind of, when I was looking through that, it was almost entirely like when I did the numbers this year, that's freshest in my mind. It was entirely pretty much JT Realmuto in there. So it's just kind of like when you get that right, it really did kind of anecdotally, it seemed to be a big advantage. I think there is the drawback because, I mean, if things go wrong with the catcher, they could go terribly wrong, arguably more than with, maybe not starting pitcher, but with any other hitting position, I would say it could go worse. So that was an interesting one. And I think the other was just kind of the general structure. Not any of the specific strategies, but still just that, hitting is still, generally speaking, the way to go. And then kind of finding the right ways to patch in the pitching within that is kind of what I took away. From that is you still want to focus on getting, it seems like, a core of counting stats and from your hitters in those first 5 rounds.
Yeah, one of the things that really stood out to me, and this is for people following along in the book, Dan's essays, page 74, 74 and 75.
What a professional right there. See, if look at this guy.
Come on. I would like we did on the last one. I'd pull the book out and show it, but we don't have the book yet. But on page 74, this is one, and this kind of builds on what Dan was just talking about. The most common, so despite all the talk about aces going early and relievers going early in the first 5 rounds, in 12-team leagues, the most common roster structure through the first 5 rounds among league winners in the online championship was 4 hitters and 1 starting pitcher.
Yeah.
And that was in 2022. That was the first time, at least in the last 4 years that you've been doing this, collecting this data, Dan, that's the first time that's happened. Previously, it was 3 hitters and 2 starting pitchers. Yeah. Last season, it was 4 hitters and 1 starting pitcher. The margin wasn't like terribly huge, but it was just really interesting to me how that was the most common roster build through 5 rounds. And it kind of does show that counting stats and hitting kind of still is king, at least in those 12 teamers. That really stood out to me.
Yeah, the difference between 12s and 15s is pretty impressive. Sorry, I'll give you the floor again, but just seeing because on some of the different ones, the differences in the 12s and the 15s, that sometimes you think there's more depths in 12, so you wouldn't be as serious to take a guy early. Maybe it's almost like it emphasizes it more, like, hey, go get this guy because the replacement value, you guys can add stuff up. So that stood out quite a bit too. But sorry, Dan, what were you going to say?
No, I think that is interesting. You have, in a way, you almost have less margin for error because because you need higher quality players in a 12-team league to fill every position. So I was just going to go to something Ryan had said in his comments is just, I do think it's interesting. I think maybe one thing that I would take away from those builds that are 4-hitter, 1 starting pitcher is also the power of having, if you really hit on that ace, the power of having it, which Bubba, I know you started with when you were kind of introducing the topic, you had brought that up. And I think, your comments combined also kind of show in the numbers that, if you hit on that one guy who is, gives you the excellent ratios, who stays healthy, who gives you the innings, gives you the strikeouts, there is real power in that, and that you can do it. If you hit on that guy, you can surround him with a lot of good hitters, and that is a winning formula that you don't have to go crazy on arms trying to get, every, strikeout guy early. That is, I thought that was interesting, combined with your 2 comments.
And that's why I know Toby loves pocket aces, because it took a long time for me to. I've done podcasting for years with him. So it took a while to rub off on me, but it made sense because if you draft 2, obviously common sense math here. If 1 gets hurt, you still have 1. So it's and if you have 2 that stay healthy long enough, that combined ratios and strikeouts, like, it allows you to have so much more flexibility with the rest of your pitching staff and so many other things. So it's kind of a double whammy. And the gentleman we'll have on next who will be on, he's a proponent of a lot of these philosophies as well, so he might be able to elaborate on this. But it is an interesting thing. And the one other thing before I give you the floor back, I think Ryan wanted to say something. Looking at the 2022 numbers, we said the first, the hitters, pitchers, like 4-1 roughly. But that was also the first year where, like, the second best philosophy and even the third best strategy, I guess, relief pitchers creeped into the mess for both of them. Yeah. And so that emphasizes, again, like we started out talking about, drafting 1 relief pitcher in the first 5 rounds, potentially being a 51% league win possibility. It shows just the strategies in general. Drafting 1 early, it's proven if you combine, like, was it almost 40%, 40% for the second and third most popular strategy, have a relief pitcher, let alone, we talked about 51% at the beginning in 12 teamers. It goes to say, I think it was Rob Silver, Ryan, at FPAS. He had a big talk on basically saying, if you break it down, there's really only like 12 quality relievers in all of baseball, and we're playing with how many teams? So it really emphasizes that deal. So sorry, you guys want to say something?
I was just going to say, so one thing that came up while I was looking at it, page 75, we were talking about pocket aces, Bubba. This really stood out to me. 15 teams, so main event winners in 2019 and 2021. Essentially, 1 out of every 5 main event winning team went pocket aces in those 2 years. That number was like 20% roughly. That number went down to 6% last year. That's pretty crazy to me. I don't know if that means pocket aces is no longer in vogue, or if those pocket aces, maybe like Walker Buehler was one of the more popular, kind of going at the back end of the first round, early second round, that back end wheel. Maybe if Walker Buehler was one of your pocket aces, you obviously probably weren't winning your league. But it was interesting to see that 21% rate for pocket A's drop down to 6% in 2022. So I'm definitely and just to give the listeners a little peek behind the curtain here, I'm glad, Dan, that you went through all that extra effort to get the 2022 data on here. So we originally, and like what Dan was saying, this was originally done on the HQ site. We didn't have the 2022 data. NFBC didn't roll their site over to 23 until right after the World Series. So it was a sprint. And I know, Dan, you're on East Coast time. You were sending me some late emails trying to get that 2022 data in there. But I'm glad you did. It really, it was really cool to get that added data point. So thank you, man. I know you've got a newborn, so you're probably up anyway. But still,
I was still off of my day job at that point too, so I had some little bit of extra time. Once she was down, I had some extra time to dig into the forecaster. I think just to add to your comment about the 2 pocket aces, I would be careful drawing too part of a conclusion that
Yeah.
pocket aces doesn't work, just because I think Giolito might have been another guy who might have
True.
fit into that
Yeah,
conversation,
that's true.
along with Bueller. So,
Yeah.
I think that's another thing is like, no matter what, pretty much, even if we did get to the win rate, portion, and we got to that at some point in time, and it showed that there was an advantage. I mean, it still comes down to you got to have the right players. You can't just,
Oh, yeah.
And I think the other thing that's interesting too, though, is that in some ways it might be counterintuitive. Like, as a strategy becomes more popular, it might work less. So, for example, if everyone went pocket aces, that's not going to work, because by the time you get to the 30th starting pitcher, I mean, not literally, but say, 8 teams do, the 16th starting pitcher, that's probably not someone you want to be taking, within the first 2 rounds of a 30-team league. So I think, kind of counterintuitively, as strategies become more popular, you might start to see them less among league winners. So that's also another kind of potential way to try to use the data, is almost reverse psychology.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, you could almost, it's like the whole gambling or statistical method. Hey, it worked for over 20% for 2 straight years. It wasn't great this last year. Now the draft strategies of some might change. Let's go back to it. Well,
Right,
like, you get value in it. So 100% there. This conversation's been awesome, Dan. And I told you, like, we're on like a schedule here, so I don't want to like keep going. And I want people to read the book, obviously. So we're gonna cut that off there. But I do have another question for you beforehand, because that was a lot of really great stuff, and I want people to go check that out. But you also did player boxes in the book. And I don't know if this is too off the wall for you here, but one thing that we like to ask Corbin and Jock the other night is, and I'm going to ask you the same question: what player box did you write that surprised you the most, good or bad? Like, hey, this guy was really good, I didn't know it, or he's really bad, I didn't know it. Like, it happens to everybody. Anybody that writes any preseason content, you go, I did not know that. Yeah, it doesn't matter how much baseball you watch. So what was the player for you?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I have answers. It's not because it's too off the wall. It's just I got to narrow it down.
You can throw a couple quick ones out there. Go for it.
Yeah, I think if I had to pick one, it would be Nelson Velasquez from the Cubs. I followed him from Playing Time Tomorrow, but when I actually dug into numbers, I wanted to put an upside tag on him. I don't think there was enough data, I think, was the verdict on that, which is fair. There's not, but just you can see the power speed potential. You look at those numbers, and it is just comes right out. I have it pulled up. If I can get to it quickly enough, the XPX 144, there is minor league equivalent data in there, but XPX 144, SPD 151, 25% stolen base opportunity percent. So, I mean, there's those numbers, just like, it could come with a terrible batting average, and I'm going to watch the Cubs carefully this offseason, what they do, because I think they're trying to take a step forward in competitiveness. But if they don't add to their outfield, that was a guy that I was just like, wow. I was intrigued by him just from following him from PT Tomorrow, but that jumped off the page. So that was probably, if I was narrowing it down to one, that would probably be the guy. And I'm hoping I'm not quite ready to jump into drafting holds just yet, but he'd be a guy.
The water's warm. The water's warm. Come
on. That's someone I definitely would be trying to target. Kind of, I don't know how late in drafts. I haven't even looked at ADP, if I'm being honest. So
don't blame you. Enjoy your time. Like you said, Ryan said, you had a newborn. Congratulations.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
that. The book's done. So relax a little there, and baseball's going to be here before you know it. So take a breather. Enjoy the holidays or whatever. But Dan, I thank you for joining us. This has been awesome. I think we're going to have to get you on again, and we'll talk for a while on some stuff, because that was I think we could have made that happen for a lot longer. So I really appreciate you joining us. Ryan, anything final for Dan before we head on out?
No, appreciate it, man. Great job with the essay, with the boxes, and yes, Nelson Velasquez. That is a box.
Yeah,
that
I'm writing that
jumps
down
off
right
the page.
Yeah, it surprised me. So yeah, thanks for having me. It was great. It was a blast.
Everybody, check him out on Twitter @_Dan Marcus. Dan, thanks for joining us, man. We will catch you some other time.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Yep.
713 ADP on Nelson Velasquez. So
that's wild. I literally wrote his name down because I'm in round 10 of 50. So that's gonna be on my radar. So no one that listens to this better pay attention. Gialdi, you're in that league. Stop. But we're going to keep this train rolling, Ryan, and we have a special guest joining us here. He is the king of pretty much all formats. Now, when I first met him, he was the king of Draft Champions formats, but my goodness, when it comes to main events, when it comes to it doesn't matter. If it's fantasy baseball, this guy can do it. He gave a couple great presentations at FPAS, and he wrote 2 awesome articles in the HQ forecast that we're going to talk about here. One is the value of volume, which is something I've tried to learn each and every year since talking to this gentleman, and it's so true. But I don't have the big brain like he does to figure this out. And then the reliability of ratio protecting relievers, another great topic. You find him on Twitter at Steve Weimer, Ymer. Don't laugh now, but I have a joke behind the scenes about that one. But Steve, how you doing, my friend?
I'm all right. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. Thanks for joining us. Really looking forward to chatting with you again.
Yeah, it'll be my pleasure, I expect.
Ryan, anything for Steve before we get this party started?
No, just we figured out you learned how to spell with Steve's Twitter handle with why the Y is.
Okay, so apparently we're going to talk about it on the scene instead of
behind the scenes. I can't let you off the hook. Off the hook.
So I've had Steve on my show. I've talked to Steve before, and I've written down things. But I'm a learner by writing, not by listening. And so I was writing down his Twitter handle, and I'm like, oh, that's why it's spelled that way. I'm an idiot. So, yep. Smart guy right here. But that's why I'm just here to host the show. The smart guys I talk to. That's how this game works. Steve, let's just kick it off here because we want to talk about both of these. And I told Ryan beforehand we could talk to you for like an entire show on these. I know. So we're going to kind of just go cliff notes and people read the book. And the first one is the value of volume. And this is something I know you and many others have talked about for quite a while is volume as in plate appearances, playing time, essentially, just like so on innings pitched, so on and so forth, because it just I'll stop. I'll let you tell us why. What is it about the value of volume that you are trying to get across in this essay?
Yeah, so I noticed at the end of the season I keep records of all my teams and their stats and so forth, and including at bats, which is what NFBC reports. You can't actually get plate appearances, and I noticed that my teams tended to do better when they had more at bats. So I just wanted to test that kind of across the entire pool, not just looking at my teams. And it was, at least on the hitting side, about what I expected, that, at bats is a big driver of success. I think more so in draft and holds, but also in the fab leagues that I looked at. Yeah, make sure that's correct. Yeah, that's right, especially in draft and hold.
Yeah, it was. Because, in the essay, you broke it out. You did draft and hold, and I think you did main and OCs as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't think I was, too surprised. Like I would have been shocked, and I don't know what had to question myself and my strategy if it didn't turn out that way, because that's been a big emphasis of mine, is always just to get the boring veterans that play, especially on the hitting side. But the correlations were probably even stronger than I expected. The way that I did it was look at how much each hitting statistic correlates with total hitting points. So if you add a team's hitting added up the team's points in the 5 hitting categories, so runs, homers, RBI, steals, and average, what correlates most strongly with that? And the most strong correlations are runs and RBIs. That kind of makes sense. They're connected to one another, and they are categories. They're directly in that total of total hitting points, right? Runs is one of the categories, RBIs is another. But then the next kind of level of correlation is home runs and at-bats. Right. So actually at-bats is more strongly correlated with total hitting points than 2 other categories. Right. So average and stolen bases, which is kind of telling, right? Because part of stolen bases and average points are, part of what we're adding up in the thing that we're targeting, the total hitting points. So this isn't a great lesson, but just other things being equal, you're more likely to do better and have more hitting points by just drafting hitters based on projected at bats than projected steals or projected average, right? And the reason for this is obvious. The other 3 categories, runs, homers, RBIs, are themselves really tightly correlated with at bats. So if you're just aiming at bats, you're very likely to get indirectly a lot of runs, homers, and RBIs.
So are you? So one of the things that stood out to me was kind of that plateau of the correlation with runs. Basically the counting stats, runs, RBI, and homers with at bats, but that did, like you said, drop off, not drop off a cliff, but stolen bases and batting average were far less correlated. Are you in terms of like a general draft strategy in the earlier rounds, if you think you can, and you can, given your success in compiling at bats, are you more willing or more targeting batting average and stolen bases early in your drafts because you cannot kind of stream the rest of those other three categories throughout the wire all season?
Yeah, I do that, and I haven't checked the results yet, but I did it in the past kind of just informally. Like I know if I've used a hitter as kind of a compiler, they're less valuable to me, like based on how I play than the numbers might suggest, right? I don't need all those runs and RBIs that they're getting by way of volume because I'm going to get those later. So I would focus more on average and stolen bases. This past year, I used a more sophisticated spreadsheet, and it's still not very sophisticated, but like I just weighted the categories differently and just took a bunch of the weight off of runs and RBIs so that when I'm calculating the value of a hitter, right, whatever the SGP from runs is, I weighted it like, I forget, like 0.8 or something like that, and shifted that weight or that value to other categories. And I think it worked a little bit, like by just kind of doing formally what I was before doing very imperfectly, probably just like roughly, this is an average guy, this is a compiler guy. So hopefully it worked. I haven't actually checked to see if my categories were more balanced than in the past. But that was the idea behind that.
Makes sense.
Interesting. No, it's always really interesting seeing you break it down like that because it makes sense at bats, like you said, the correlations of runs, RBIs, and power, but you're not correlating the average and stolen bases. But we just got to talking to Dan where, stolen bases might not be as important draft-wise in early rounds as it was before. So then that's what's fun about all this is kind of trying to piece it all together. It's the puzzle that is a fantasy baseball team. So I bet if they combined the at bats with the stolen base guys up early, that would probably change the spectrum a bit instead of looking at the specific things. But I digress. That's a whole different topic. When it comes to these deals, either 21 and 22, so there's kind of trends sort of that you could see. What kind of did you see any trends, or is it just the consistent? Hey, if I pound these categories, I'm going to do very well. Or were there certain categories they're like, it correlated, but not as much as year to year, where it's kind of a little more not as fluid, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. So both for homers and stolen bases, the correlation with at bats this year, 2022, was less strong than for 2021, and there wasn't like space in the forecaster to go into that. But that's kind of interesting. Overall, the correlations are still pretty strong between like hitting points and at bats. But for home runs and stolen bases specifically, they were lower, especially in the 15-team leagues. And I think that makes sense. Like for home runs, I get that. I understand, right? Like changes to the ball, the humidor, like home runs were more dependent on actually, I think, like having raw power than in previous years, where anyone who was playing full time could just volume their way to like 15 homers. And that was less true this year. So the correlation between at bats and home runs wasn't quite as strong. For steals, I'm not sure why that is. I wonder if it's just like the overall averages are thrown off by a few players with like really high stolen base to at bat ratios, like Birdie, McCarthy. They got a whole bunch of steals that playing true. A lot. McCarthy came up and stole so many. I don't know, like if they're, if a few players like that will have a big enough effect to explain like the league wide ratio. But that's the only thing I could think of on why the stolen bases were less strongly correlated with at bats this past season.
Real quick, and Ryan, I'll give you the floor in a minute here. Did you find anything that correlated between like, was the 12 more successful than the 15 versus the DC? Like, I know it's kind of on the charts there, but is there anything you saw where at bats were even more important? I would assume the 15s. I could be completely wrong just because of the depth of the league. But did you see was there leeway, I guess, in certain formats that if you didn't nail at bats, you're still kind of okay, where you had to nail at bats in another format?
Really, it was just the draft and holds, I think. And that was even more so in 2021, but there's a difference there. And that makes sense. Right? In Fab leagues, between the 12 and the 15 is actually really similar, the level of the importance of at bats. And I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head, but presumably, like if teams are active there, you can get a similar supply. You might be able to get more at bats in a 12 off the waiver wire than a 15, but you can kind of fill in the holes. Whereas in a draft and hold, right, if you lose players, then your hitting points are going to suffer as a result, right, alongside with those at bats.
I wonder what with the Gladiator coming out this year. I wonder what that correlation with at bats is going to be next year. I would think extremely high with no bench and no fab moves.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm curious, like on the pitching side. So
Yeah.
in general, like on the article that I did, the volume in pitching isn't nearly as important. The correlation isn't that strong between the number of innings pitched a team has and their total pitching points, so adding up the points in the 5 pitching categories. But especially like in the Gladiator, I think that's going to be pretty weak. Like a lot of people are focused on like avoiding, like getting the volume, like it's avoiding injury prone people on the pitching side as well. And making sure that you don't draft rookies and so forth. But I don't know. Like I think everyone's still trying to figure out the Gladiator format. By the time we start to like get some theories, I think it's gonna be shut down. But like my inclination is more like just to go for the low quantity, good quality, right? So like I don't care if they're injury prone, like Indrahini or whatever. If I get those good ratios, hopefully he gets enough innings that I can do well in other categories. But what I want to avoid is those high volume, bad ratio guys. Like, sorry,
Trevor
like
Rogers,
Eduardo Rodriguez, Trevor Rogers.
Right.
For you two guys.
Yep, for both of us.
Yeah. So
that's fair. I appreciate it. I felt like Toby reminds me of that all the time. Yeah, I know.
Well, I guess I mean, less cruelly and probably even more extreme. Like I imagine Barrios would probably be the biggest.
Yeah, Giolito.
Giolito came up.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just me like kind of spitballing. No one really knows what to do in the Gladiator drafts. I think
it's fun watching those Gladiator drafts for sure, and see that one play out. But I like your comment there because it's one thing Ryan and I talked about on our starting pitching review is, Julio Urias is a guy you're talking about quality over quantity. Basically, he doesn't put all the innings in like you'd expect from a quote unquote ace. But what he puts out there is elite, like elite, the wins, the ratios, like it's amazing what he can do. And I think we all have kind of a fog sometimes of early round pitching. We need this guy that's going to be a workhorse. He's going to do all these things. And Urias isn't that guy, but he does everything else because he's just not a workhorse. And I think that could be a great way to look at regular season, the full season roto, like with Fab Leagues plus the Gladiator idea of, like you said, take the quality over the quantity sometimes. It's like the old joke with Kershaw. You might only get 120 to 140 innings, but those are amazing innings. So like, do you go that direction? So it's interesting.
One last thing I wanted to ask, I know we have another essay to talk about is, so like one thing that I'm seeing just chatter and Twitter and stuff is maximizing plate appearances is almost becoming, just my opinion, almost becoming a buzzword, almost becoming groupthink in terms of the industry, because of research like this, where it does show that counting stats correlate, very well with at bats and that sort of thing. My question is like, do you think it's gotten to the point, or will get to the point where you need to pivot from that to kind of cut against the grain, or is it kind of an easier said than done kind of thing to maximize plate appearances, and it's a effort and work thing to actually do it throughout the season?
So I think it is easier said than done. It's effort, work, and luck. I think you're right that people are catching on more. Like it's been talked about enough that there's less value in those players that are just going to get playing time. Right. And a lot of them like are getting drafted ahead of the rookies that never play. Whereas a few years ago, like people were really happy, dreaming on the rookies, and they draft a whole bunch of them, especially like the draft and holds, and then they never come up. Right. I think that's less true. And I don't know if it's entirely for that reason or not, but I do know that in draft champions in 2022, the average team had more at bats than 2021 by like 60 or 80, but like enough that there's a difference there. So whether that was just luck or I guess the NLDH is a big part of it. I think there is focus on that. Like my teams had fewer at bats on average in 2022 than 2021. And I'm going to attribute that might partly be bad drafting, but like it's not lack of effort. Like I'm really careful about my lineups and so forth. It's at least partly like luck, right? That you draft people on a bunch of teams, they get injured, or like to me, like just anecdotally, it felt like all my hitters that got injured, it was on like a Monday, right? Like after lineups had locked, and then you miss them for a while. So I do think that like it's a battle, like there is luck, but you still have to maximize within like what's available to you. The at-bats that you can get. and draft knowing that those injuries are going to happen, right? So have like redundancies upon redundancies when you're filling out, especially for those draft and hold rosters.
Yeah, and being able to talk. I mean, I know Bubba and I have talked about when we did our when we took our L's and did our lessons learned for this year. I know one of my things was like literally block off my calendar at 4 p.m. Pacific time, Mondays and Fridays, and really, I mean, watch who's in lineups, who's not in lineups. That is the kind of effort where, like, if you miss that someone's not in your lineup on a Monday, misses Monday, Tuesday, that stuff adds up. And, you know, some of that, like you said, Steve, might be luck, but some of it is, you know, planning for that, having those redundancies and really watching those lineups like a hawk twice a week. Something I know I need to get better at, even though it's so easy to say, oh, I'm going to maximize my plate appearances this year. Actually going out and executing that, I think is takes some effort and willpower for sure.
Yeah, I remember Steve, one of Steve's topics at FPAS with Potts and Vlad, and Steve goes into his whole process of when he sets lineups and does this and that. I remember walking out with a couple guys going, "I'm never going to be good at this game. I don't have
I'm
that
not gonna
time.
win.
I just can't. I need to do one thing apparently because there's no way I can do this." But it makes sense. Like it makes tons of sense. But yeah,
I mean, it's obviously it helps anyone like to not leave an injured player or in your roster, but also like the way that I draft, like I need that more than others, I guess. Like I don't hit on breakout people as much as like people. I don't have like player evaluation skills and stuff like that. So someone who can like do a great job of seeing the breakout pitchers coming and so forth, it'll be probably a little less important for them. But like I know this is how I play, so this is how I'm going to draft. Where I'm going to try to like get the pitching early, and then I'm going to have to get the volume on hitting if I'm going to kind of make up for the fact that I didn't draft the top hitters.
All right, let's pivot here to the second essay from Steve because he's got a lot of great stuff. I highly recommend checking out any work he does anywhere, podcast or written, because it's very good. And real quick, how many leagues have you done so far, Steven? Like what, 12, 13?
I just this afternoon started what I think is my fifth DC, fourth or fifth. And I've done just one gladiator so far. I'm doing another one of those tonight, actually. But
so we're at the pick Steve's brain in another month or so and talk about diversification. I've talked to Steve about it before. It's very interesting because he does spread out his profile, but also keeps a core at time. Like it's a really fun talking to Steve. But to the topic at hand, your reliability of ratio, protecting relievers. And I'm so glad you wrote this because I can yell into a microphone until I'm blue in the face. People go, "That's just that guy." You wrote about it though, so it makes a lot of sense because I've been like on this train for. Get me guys that are going to be quality innings and might not be getting me saves. You never know what's going to happen. For someone like yourself that plays DC so much, it makes a ton of sense. It's called speculating on closers, but in a different format, different way of doing it. But even in fab leagues, like go take this guy that might get 2 or 3 relief appearances and not crush you compared to some bad streamer somewhere. And those are the little things that add up. So what did you what was the big points you got across here in this article about reliability of ratio protecting relievers?
Yeah. So kind of the way I came at it was like you hear people say in draft season, like don't pay for last year's great middle reliever, find this year's, right? So I was looking at like how to do that and how reliably, like is that as easy as people make it out to be? So the way that I interpreted it was like to look at second half value using like SGP form. This was how much a pitcher contributed in each of the 5 categories in the second half, and then which first half statistics best predicted that from, I think it was 2019, 2021, and 2022. And the results, again, like I don't think were particularly surprising. Hopefully there's value in like confirming things that are commonly held, but like especially for like baseball HQ readers, like it wouldn't be surprising that it's like K- walk percentage, right? And then swinging strike and ball percentage are like the big ones. That if you find relievers who meet certain thresholds in those categories in the first half, it's not a guarantee, but it's a pretty good chance that they will be valuable for your ratios in the second half. And the value is like pretty small. I think on average it was like a point in total between ERA and WHIP, but like the title is like ratio protecting relievers. Like you just want to not blow up and hold steady with those. And then also they get additional value from strikeouts and hopefully some wins and saves. But you really want to make sure that you're not throwing, if your goal is to make sure you're not using those really dangerous streamers and still want to get some value. This is one way to find the relievers who will do that. So to look at those kind of indicators from the first half.
Yeah, no. Do you prefer to use this as an? Okay, you might have just said it. I totally just skipped past it. But is it an in-season tool per se, or is this something you would rather use for your draft champions leagues as you prep for 2023?
Because it was meant in season because I just that's when I did the work, was looking at, okay, who should we be rostering or chasing in the second half of this past season. But I use the same kind of framework for draft champions. Like if I'm looking at reliever skills in the round 30s and 40s and so forth of the draft champion, I'm probably going to look more second half than full season. And I think there's just so much volatility in relievers. So yeah, it would be the same kind of framework that we're just looking at this last chunk of few months and using that to try to predict. And I haven't checked this. It might be less strong of a correlation if you look at like second half of this year projecting first half of next year, right? Because more can change in the interim in terms of pitch mix and injuries and so forth. But I imagine that the best predictors, even if they have a lower degree of success than in season, but still the best predictors would probably be strikeout minus walk rate. And like this isn't groundbreaking, but also like swinging strike rate, especially for levers and so forth.
I mean, sometimes
seems like a great speculator
go
call,
ahead,
Brian.
Bubba.
It seems like a great speculator call, Brian. Go for it.
No, it's just, I mean, even though something like confirms what you thought, I mean, that still is valuable, especially with pitcher stats. There's just so much out there. It is good to know, like, we hone in on just 2 or 3 indicators and go from there. The other, and in this case, like, it was nice to see swinging strike and ball percentage, which I use all the time. I know Toby's used a lot as well. He really picked up on ball percentage that we put in the forecaster a few years ago. So it's just nice to kind of get that confirmation. The last thing that I thought was interesting with this is that you looked at Steve first and second half, because maybe this is just my teams and my experiences. I'm more looking at those middle relievers in the second half of the season. Injuries pile up throughout the year. My starters, go to the tank, and I'm struggling to field a starting pitching staff more in the second half than I am in the first half. So it was nice to be able to look at that. And then, like you kind of started off, Steve, like there is that kind of narrative out there that relievers are extremely volatile. And then, I mean, from season to season, like they certainly can be. I always, Chris Davinsky is the guy who always comes to mind, who was just knockout for like a year and a half, and then just kind of went away. But to kind of put numbers behind this in season, I think is a pretty useful tool when you're not trying to pick up Zach Logue, for example, in the second half, like I was trying to do for Oakland last year, and instead just go get like Evan Phillips.
Yeah, smart. Steve, another question on this for you here, because we'll have a few more before we have to wrap this up, unfortunately. When you start to look, you're comparing first half, second half, and maybe you haven't done the research yet, because it's probably really minute, like specific stuff. But when do you think the window of looking at these, because reliever sample size is so small compared to other sample sizes. So when can you start seeing like a K to walk rates and swinging strike rates and be like, you know what, let's jump on this guy. Let's go get him. Or like, when do you maybe start feeling comfortable? Is it a month or two? Because when we're talking first half, we're talking 3 to 4 months. When do you think it starts to, like, because it's such a small sample size?
Yeah. I'm bringing this up. So I'm just bringing up my notes on what other people have done in terms of stabilization rates, and strikeout rate for pitchers is like, 70 plate appearances. I estimated at 17 innings pitched. Walk rate's about 40. So you're not going to get 40 innings pitched from a reliever in the first half. You're going to have to jump a little bit before that. It might be, and I haven't really done the research, like you said, but you might want to focus more on those sub indicators, right? That have pitches as their denominators, so swinging strike and ball rate. But probably those should start to be meaningful, 15 innings or so. That might be, I guess, 2 months. But you if you don't have that confidence, you're still going to be making pickups and so forth. So even if you don't have like as much data as you'd like, what you have is still better than nothing, right? So you still go for the pitchers, even if it's 5 innings in, this pitcher has, this reliever has, a 40% strikeout rate and his velocity's up, then Doesn't guarantee he's going to keep doing well, but it's better than having velocity down and a 10% strikeout rate. So you take your chances, I guess.
Most definitely. Ryan, I'll let you have the last question if you got one. Then we're gonna have to unfortunately let Steve go for the evening.
No, super interesting stuff. Thanks, Steve. There's so many more, so much more we could talk. I'm super interested in what Eno Saris does with Stuff Plus and how that works for relievers. I'd be interested to kind of put that to the test in a study like this and kind of compare that to, our HQ sub indicators. There's just, so much we can go on, but super important stuff, super interesting stuff, Steve. And it's always good when you put those numbers to it and get those correlations and, prove what you thought. That has value. So thanks, man. Really good job with both of these, and glad they are on the HQ website as well. Because your HQ column had, put, the HQ column equivalent of this, you kind of published mid-season and had some very interesting names that you added onto the list as well. We don't typically put names in the essays just because it's not really relevant to what it was last year. But yeah, great job with it, man.
Good, thanks.
All right, thanks for joining us, Steve. We'll chat again sometime. Like I said, we could probably have talked about these for a long time, but we're on a schedule here. So everybody check out Steve on Twitter at Steve Weimer, Ymer. And Steve, thanks for joining us, man. We will do this again sometime.
All right, see you guys.
See ya. All righty, folks. We have one more guest join us, and just for people, if you are watching this or you might hear it, Ryan's going to switch his platforms here in a minute. So you might lose him for a second, but he will pop back on.
I'll
the
be
screen.
back.
So don't worry about that.
In a noisier setting, most likely.
Yes. There's a lot of back. Remember the start of the show? School is out, folks. But we have a special guest, a third guest joining us this evening to talk some more forecaster fun. And he wrote an awesome column on Can You Hack the Waiver Wire? And I don't know about you, Ryan, but the waiver wire is something that is the conundrum of conundrums. It seems like year in and year out. What fab? What do we do? What do we do? So we're going to talk to him. You can find him on Twitter at Huge Days. Cary James, how we doing, man? Oh, you're quiet. Check your mic. Oh, we're 3 for 3. We'll get him in a minute. We got you.
Yeah,
we got you.
I'm gonna switch while we're waiting. I'm gonna switch.
Switch your stuff.
Upstairs.
We'll do the whole thing. It'll be fun, and then we'll get Cary on here to talk about some waiver wire fun. Still quiet, Cary. Still quiet. No, Ryan, go switch. We'll do this in just a second. It's technology. It's so much fun. I'm telling you. He can hear us. That's half the battle, folks. He can hear us. So we'll get his mic working in no time, and we'll rock and roll with segment 3 of this awesome show. A lot of great news. And like we told you guys, the forecasters got so much awesome stuff. And I let off the show talking about not just player boxes, but articles and essays. And that's what these guys are going to talk about today. So we'll get him on here in just a second. We'll get Bloom back up. We got Cary back up. And I got Bloomfield in a new setting, folks. We're still waiting for Cary.
I am back on. I've got plenty of background noise here. So
I like the painting. It's a different setting from the normal look. Oh, and the trees, so festive.
All right, do you have me now?
Oh, we got you. Cary's with us.
Oh,
you did it. Perfect timing. Ryan's got his new setting. We got Cary here at Huge Days on Twitter. How you doing, man? Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I got here by the skin of my teeth. Got a couple.
I saw your tweet.
Yes. Just doing some juggling of my own. It's quiet here now, but the storm will soon arrive. So my family will return. Yes.
Yeah. We all have kids. Yours are a lot bigger, it sounds like, than ours, but we get it.
Yeah, my son's got a 98 percentile head size. So,
Yep. Nice. I credit my poor daughter's got my head, so she's in trouble. But exactly. I get it. But man, you wrote an awesome article on Can You Hack the Waiver Wire? So I'm going to give you the floor. What were the points? What did you accomplish by writing this? What are the readers actually going to accomplish by reading this, I should say?
Okay. So when I got into the when I got the gig of like writing about strategy, like the gaming side of things, game theory, my first thought was, what can I do? My first thought was, what do I do? Do I just, I think I just have to assume that everyone has all the information already. I don't know if you guys already do this, but a while ago, like I started doing fantasy baseball, I think in 2001 or 2. So by now, I figure everyone who I'm in leagues with reads all the same waiver wire articles. They read all the same projections. They do all the same stuff that I do. So if we were to start from that point, how do you even, if you start there and you think about it for a minute, you're like, well, how do I even get excited about the waiver wire now? If I already know that everyone's sniping for the same person, what can I do to gain an advantage of that? And I mean, the very simple answer to that one is to simply know who's going to break out and when they do and pick them up before everyone else. Now,
simple game, man.
That is easier said than done, right? And I don't proclaim to have a silver bullet, but I do know that there are tools that you can use in whatever league and format you have to find little advantages. And it just depends. Like I play mostly in roto leagues, like year long. I don't do much daily. So one of the first things I usually do when I look at a player pool is I click on whatever. In Yahoo, they have the research assistant. They have like the pick, who's trending, who you can pick up, who everyone else is picking up. And the first thing I usually do is just to, get rid of all the pitchers from the pool because that starters are getting scooped up everywhere. And that's kind of where I started with my article. Oh boy. Sorry, that was just a very important phone call that I just professionally muted. Let me see. So the next thing I kind of do is just, oh man, they hit me real hard with that little momentum breaker. So basically, what's important to me is I look at like rates of pickup, and by that I mean you're not probably going to find the next guy if they're being picked up by everybody else at that time, right? If player, let's say, let's just say it right out. Let's say Cody Bellinger somehow starts out really hot, right?
Somehow.
My arch nemesis, right? Mm-hmm. My great foe. Everyone's going to, as soon as he hits like 3 home runs in the first 2 weeks, there's going to be like 60 articles generated across different websites saying, now is the time. Like, this might be it. He might be back. You got to grab him. But I think the 3 of us and our listeners know that if you're having that conversation, he's probably picked up in leagues that don't have, he's already picked up by other people, right? It's usually first at the computer unless you're in a more humane league that does the, fab, the daily or weekly fab, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess the idea would be, what do you do if you know that Cody Bellinger's gone? What's the best way to find the guys who are going to break out? And the best way to do that I found was looking at the month-long trends and looking at the two-week-long trends. And that sounds pretty simple. It sounds like everyone else is probably doing it. But the reaction I got to the article was that not many people are actually using that tool. Most people have jobs, have lives. They depend on the waiver wire articles, and they depend on outside influences to guide them. And lead them to victory, or to shout and threaten them violently in DMs when they're wrong, right?
So true.
So my thought is, why don't we? What can you do if we're all reliant on other people? Which is it's a wonderful giving industry of experts everywhere, right? And I don't proclaim to be one, but I like to think outside of everything, take a big step back, and be like, what's something so simple and stupid, but everyone's ignoring it? And that is the one that I've found has been most effective. It's how I snatch guys up, and then a week or 2 weeks later, they're in every article. And that is simply look at a month long, look at a 2-week long trend, and look for guys that aren't being picked up a lot. Then you just look at their schedule, see what's coming up, and you just hit the ad and hope you get lucky with a $1 or $2 bid rather than, talking to Jeff Zimmerman on his Sunday night chat saying, do I bid 85% of my entire budget on Cody Bellinger? Right? Like that.
So true, though. It's so true what you're saying. Yeah, I was a week or two late, and here goes your whole budget. Yep.
No, and I mean, I don't know. I feel for those people, and I am that person. I mean, I guess that's the fun part about writing these type of articles is I get to put myself in the head of like, I've been playing long enough where I remember, sitting there and not clicking accept on a trade until I got 3 replies from experts via email or like on Fantasy Baseball Cafe, the .com or was it .com? I think. Yeah.
I used to be that's a blast from the past. I used to be not heavy on there, but I used to go there all the time.
I wrote some articles on that thing. That was crazy. That was my first writing job. Yeah, and I got yelled at immediately and was like, "What a choice this was to write for."
So true.
I wrote a deep waiver wire article and was yelled at for not including more mains. Like, why didn't you write about this guy? And it's like he's owned in 90% of the leagues. It's beautiful. All right.
Look in the first paragraph. It says deep ads.
And I learned to just bite my tongue.
Yep. That's all you can do.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so that's kind of how I approach the hacking the waiver wire. It's a work in progress. I appreciate that it's in the book. Like I picked up this magazine, or it's more of a book, I should say, like every year. So it's kind of wacky to see my name in it. But yeah, it's an honor.
It's pretty wild. It's good to see, though. It's good to see it in the waiver wire. Like I introduced to start out with, it's one of the biggest conundrums in the entire thing. It's, do I take a chance early, like you said, for a buck or two? Do I wait? Do I do this? Do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm with you. I do a lot of looking at, I guess, trends or 2 to 4 weeks trends, like you're saying, and it does help a ton. It's so hard to, like, my hardest thing is dropping the right guy. That's the real fun part. And when to give up on the love of your life.
You've grown your third leg. That you're this play. The player that everyone said was going to go off for a month. They don't. You drop them, and they produce like a season and a half worth of offensive stats for somebody else, and it's so crushing.
One of the things you put in there, Cary, not to cut you off, but it was one of the things that I was like totally nodding my head when you wrote this, was that pitchers are a totally different animal. In competitive leagues, you cannot wait for consecutive starts before nabbing starters who have made changes like tweaking a pitch mix, or one game is enough. Like and that's a literal pull from the essay. Like I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's, I think, what a lot of people are doing, but if not, they should be. Looking at, I've always kind of said pitchers can not reinvent themselves, but they can change pretty quick, and you need to kind of be aggressive with those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly a wait. I played fast and loose with pitchers for the most part in the entire game. Like I wait on aces. I gamble, and then during the season, I hope to land. It's a very reckless strategy, and it when it hits big.
That's your strider.
Yes, sir.
But I'm a good pain is my best friend in terms of pitching. So like it's just you can't wait. They're just like with all it's my least favorite part of the waiver wire is finding pitching. So that's why I start drafting pitchers late, but I just keep drafting them. And it annoys the heck out of the people I draft with. And that's the other thing. I think I didn't have space to put it in that article, but I wrote about it in general. Just the idea that with the waiver wire, you psychologically just have to know who your opponents are. You have to know what their patterns are. You have to know that you're in this league with this guy that is going to make sure that the minute that a middle reliever starts warming up, like in the 8th, that they're going to be gone the next day. Right? Like you have to know all this minutia, and it's like I've been in one league for decades, and that's helpful, right? Decades is a good sample size to learn people's behavior. When it comes to expert leagues or other public leagues, that's a totally different thing. But usually, like that's for me, that's about throwing out bait. Like, did you guys see that RotoWire article? Did you guys get behind the paywall? Did Baseball HQ? Did you read this? Did you like? And you can suss out some beautiful information. Like it's all there, and then you'll not. That's when I can strike. Ooh, someone else is popular.
That's right. It's a giant game of chess, is what it is.
It is. It's glorious.
Another question from your little essay there is, you mentioned rest of season projections, which I think is phenomenal. It's a great point. I know Steamer does rest of season projections. Some other sites do as well. I know HQ does. I'm not going to throw that one out here. And you don't have to be the company man here, but which ones do you like to use to kind of combine with 2 to 4 week trends? Use some rest of season projection, because they're all good in their own ways. That's why I like to mention them all. They all have validity to what they do. So what do you prefer to use?
And I'll just add to that question. I'll make the question harder for you too. Is like, so yes, there's all those sources. I also use Razzball does that not many other people have, is the weekly projections.
Yes, they're phenomenal.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Some of the best in the game, period. Like there's no denying that.
Do you combine that with the rest of the season? How do you manage all of those things?
So when I first found Fangraphs, I became a lunatic. And I mean, I know what the ATC does, a kind of aggregate of 3 or 4 different systems, right? I was not the first person to do this, certainly, right? Like, but I aggregated everybody's progression, projections. I created a giant monster spreadsheet. I looked to see, I basically used projections early on in my career to kind of kill bias. And be like, yes, I'm excited and think Hobby Baez can go 40-40, but like, is he really going to do that? Every system says he's not going to do that. So right now, as of right now, I use Razzball, I use Baseball HQ, and I use, I use the bat. I can't remember which one on Fangraphs I use. I aggregate those 3 at the beginning of the season. After that, it's really dicey, I gotta say, because I don't know, like Yahoo has their own little system. They're like and I think I made this reference somewhere. I'm not sure if anyone got it. It's like, I don't know if you play Japanese role-playing video games, but they have this. It's all about hidden numbers. You're attacking something, you don't actually know how many hit points it has left. With Yahoo, with their projections, I never know where the math is coming from, especially when it's rest of season. You'll have a guy you'll have like Bellinger or other players that are massively they haven't got a hit in 30 days, but they're still somehow projected to hit 35 home runs. So I've stopped looking at those. In season, it's kind of, I'll lean on Razzball, and what I'll do is basically take the current season totals, and I will weigh that against the rest of the season to kind of create a false full season statistics. It's not foolproof, but it feels a little bit better, and it's a better hedge when you use the trade analyzer function, which a bunch of different sites have, and they'll tell you like your trade is totally fair, and then you'll go on the next one, it'll say no, you're getting hosed, and you're looking at the projection outputs, and they're just bizarre. And here's the thing: I don't know how to build those things. I am a mere mortal. So I depend. I'm a leech on them. Don't take my criticism as scorn.
Hey, trust me, I'm totally not smart with any of that stuff. So yeah, I just suck up where I can find it, and we go from there. 100% with you. And what I did enjoy sucking up was the content that you wrote there at Baseball HQ in the Forecaster, Cary. So we are going to wrap it up there, as it's been an awesome time with you. And thanks for joining us, man. It's been great. Look forward to chatting with you next time.
Yeah, good luck, guys. I'll talk to you later. Happy holidays.
On Twitter at Huge Days. Ryan, this has been an absolute pleasure, my friend. We're going to wrap things up here as well. But hey, 2 successful HQ shows. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, this was awesome to do the player box, kind of trading war stories on Wednesday night, and then tonight going more essay wise. So I thought it was cool to kind of just talk to folks and give them the chance to talk a little bit more about their work. So we are going to have a live show in like 2 weeks, mid December, that I'm going to host with
Brenton, Ray, and Ron. Ryan froze. I was answering for him. He's Brenton, Ray, and Ron, I'm pretty sure. So he'll get you filled in on that and much, much more. But we'll wrap things up there, as Ryan's got daddy duties to go take care of. It is a Friday afternoon for us, Friday evening for you at home if you're watching live. But I'll be we'll back to you guys next week. Another episode of Bubba and the Bloom. Will not be a forecaster episode, I don't think. Who knows? It was a blast. We could have talked about this for a long time with these guys, but hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, let us know. We're going to get you ready for the 2023 season before you know it, as we're already into December, already in the draft season. But for now, everybody, check out Ryan on Twitter at RyanBHQ. I'm Matt B. Dantrick. We'll catch you guys next time.